Off you go.
Okay. In today's world, why are we considering hiring neurodiverse people for apprenticeships? And in this presentation, we'll be looking at what are the risks and what are the challenges and what are the advantages of hiring neurodiverse people. And also, what is neurodiversity as regards individuals and what does that mean in the workplace? And why are neurodiverse individuals being considered for apprenticeships? I hope this becomes apparent, and there'll be a number of stages to this presentation. We're going to consider for the first part, stage one, the pre-onboarding in the advocacy. So, some questions that we are raising as regards the study and this presentation today is, do leaders know about disability at work, and do they understand the best support to provide to employees and give them that extra bit of help if they are disabled or have hidden disabilities in the workplace? And consideration is the workplace accessible, and what do we understand by neurodiversity at work? Well, there are some number of aims and objectives and goals that I have in mind here with the presentation, and that's to consider employers to onboard apprentices by understanding the evidence and the developmental pathways presented in this slide and this presentation today. This could also refer to the learner, the educator, and employer having a shared language around neurodiversity and agreeing its terminology using the language of neurodiversity in their D&I departments or with the actual apprentices themselves. The objective is that the apprentice and employer get to understand the neurodiverse circumstances and build a learning pathway together that is person-centered, holistic, and measured against a predetermined learner pathway, profile, and industry standard, which is a pathway star. We can see that the aspects of oh, you lost me there.
Just keep going, Gavin.
Yeah, I've lost the slide presentation, sorry. So the aspects of collective intelligence process with a focus on person-centered support that is readily understood by all parties and is easily implemented. If we have a look at the slides following on from this, you'll see in phase one and in phase two, there'll be more direction and scrutiny in phase two, along with an agile process that is referenced against the learner developmental pathway. This slide indicates and gives us an overall a view of the challenges in a Venn diagram developed by Nancy Doyle off the work of Mary Colley. And we can see that this refers to a collective intelligence where groups or teams' combined capacity to perform a wide variety of tasks and solve diverse problems. Collective intelligence has been found across groups of teams and is indicated to be a factor in which direction teams are going to go. And that was referenced by Chickasaw 2017. You can see the context of learning today and why we should consider this going forward. And that will play our part in how we advocate for students and learners going forward. And we can see that as we move forward and the technocracy and technology moves on and the way the learning styles have to adapt as well, we want to consider what learning means today as we are preparing children for education and apprenticeships in the future. We can see that most learning formats and the times in the past have been a backbone of reference and have this backbone model. Well, how does this reflect in the personality and experience of the learner in practice? And what is understood by this? It's an interesting and contested ground, and that has had a long history throughout the 20th century. And post-1945, we had a modern subject-based curriculum with practical subjects, working class, gender-specific classics being maintained in the grammar schools and independent schools. You can find this is linked to Oxbridge. We also have the legacy of its backbone today, and it's largely contested in terms of that model today. You see that the relevant skills of problem solving, information management, and emotional literacy, the fluid thinking, whether they are skills or not for the 21st century. The aspect of inclusion and thinking is food for thought going forward as preparing for the world for work is anything but linear. We need more fluid thinking or fluid intelligence, and these are phrases that I'm picking up in the workplace today. Hence my argument for those in the world of neurodiversity having place in the world of work today. If we look at the historical evidence that is quantitative, there are a lot of children in every classroom that all of them have some communication difficulty or have goes on to affect them severely in later life. We can see that in areas of poverty, 50% of them start school have delayed communication skills. And so poverty plays a serious factor in whether children actually progress and function well through school or have developmental delay in their in both their outcomes and achievements. And you can see that this is shown in 17 to 14-year-olds with serious behavior problems and have a language impairment. As we can go on to see that 60% of young children in young offender institutes have communication difficulties. You can see a pattern really drawing out here where between the have and the have-nots, and those who have access to quality education and quality support within the communities do progress a lot better, and the divide is a lot less in terms of their outcomes. And that is demonstrated in the prison population, in the welfare population, and also how they engage with education as a whole, post-school and transition into work, which is what we're looking at to focus on in phase 1. You see a study by the London School of Economics. The Prince's Trust found that a lot of unaddressed educational underachievement is costing about 18 billion per year to the economy, and that can be found in the Communication Trust resources in fact sheet 2020. If we consider the historical evidence that 60% of all prisoners have difficulties with communication, either understanding or expressing themselves or both. In recent times, 2019 and 2020, Amanda Kirby has done a lot of research into neurodiversity and learning disabilities in relation to individuals within the prison population. We can find that 25% of those individuals are neurodiverse, and further, the employment in the population is around 2%. You can see that through various populations, Foundation for People with Learning Disabilities, and publications, and the Department for Health valuing young people and statistics online. Just to give you an idea of the costs of versus implementation in terms of advocacy or support in school for neurodiverse versus supporting someone in prison who is neurodiverse, who's there because they missed out on the advocacy process. This is historical evidence, quantitative evidence, that costs anywhere between 47 to 87,000 pounds, and that's what costs the state. Generally, that's the local borough who ends up paying that out. And I myself have worked with people with complex needs, and found this to be the case, where people transition out of school, they then get transitioned into the world of work because of various social barriers or transition barriers, or the lack of support of advocacy in school or they've been excluded from school because of their learning challenges and their behavior hasn't been appropriately addressed by the system or the school itself. So what do we understand by this in terms of the indicators for failure? We can see that we can predict likely statistical hoods of neurodiverse people following a negative pathway. We see that we need to act to break down this underachievement and address the advocacy between the world of school and the world of work and that transition process, and which is what I'm hoping to achieve in this presentation, is that employers and those academics understand the process, and I hope to provide a process of support through that transition through my work here and presentation. So what we have here is a relationship triangle, and we can see that the careers advisor in this triangle process plays a key role between the world of school and the world of work, and they support generally the teachers, the students, and the parents in terms of capacity, functionality, and some characteristics that we'll be looking at later on in the slide. And so, the challenges that schools are facing, unfortunately, is that a lot of the responsibility of transition has been devolved to schools, and with very little money and poor budgets, and subsequent to that, we're finding that youth are unprepared for the world of work. So we can see in the top of the triangle the employer profile, the school expectations, and the leavers profile. And that's really important because the leavers profile was often very different to their expectations and very different to what the employer profile has in mind for a new employee onboarding. So we need to marry all of these up. And this relationship triangle, forms a key aspect of support going forward. This really demonstrates the relationship triangle and the transition and different phases of opportunity that an individual finds themselves in terms of onboarding for an apprenticeship. And this can be quite a challenge if you don't have access to the guidance that's needed in these relationships. So predominantly, for the sake of this presentation, we're looking at phase 1, transition, advice and guidance, and psychology support from school into a transition into an assessment and advice and guidance process. We look at skills, we look at capacity, we look at attitude, we look at the equity, equality, parity, we look at the developmental capacity of the individual, both in the advice and guidance process. And we make this process a person-centered and holistic process. Alongside this, we look at it being supported by a number of well-documented assessment tools, DIRT Profiler, PAGS, Developmental Pathway, and we look at STAR and Outcome STAR, which is specifically being developed for people who have long-term unemployment or have developmental challenges such as neurodiversity or hidden disabilities, including brain injury as well. So if we look at this, we look further into the psychological and profile assessments prior through the transition process. So this is Gestalt psychology, transactional psychology, and we look at DIRT Profiler and PAGS Profile in supporting that onboarding process. So Gestalt psychology plays an important part in supporting the mind and the capacity of the individual to change and their environment. The transactional psychology prepares them for interaction and their capacity for interaction within that environment. The DIRT Profiler gives the person an understanding of where they stand in that space. So, for instance, if you're going for an apprenticeship as a footballer, the DIRT Profiler would say you're a fullback, you're left wing, you're a forward, And then a PAGS profile would say to the referee or the coach, well, this is the developmental pathway for that fullback, the forward, the left wing, and that profile will stick with them. And they'll be looking at sort of executive functions for that individual within that space, just to highlight some of the executive functions: impulse control, emotional control, flexible thinking, working memory, self-monitoring, planning and prioritizing, task initialization, and organization capacities. Later in phase 2, we look at the further down the line of what these 8 executive function means and how they're implemented in regards to the development of the apprentice or the neurodiverse individual within the apprenticeship space. So it's just a model of learning theory and how the individual will be profiled and supported. So this is a Venn diagram that overlaps the learning profile and the learning plan in the initial phase of phase 1. And it's in a Venn diagram because these different theorists can be moved around according to or changed in size or color to the need of the individual. So it's very holistic and person-centered, and the learning as is the learning plan. So we look at and match the learning plan against the profile and assessments and the psychology against the needs of the individual and the way that they learn. And we can see that they're and look for specific characters that match a specific outcome or capacity or executive function. So, for instance, a person who's not athletic wouldn't join a football club or have the capacity, but they may be very good at baking, or they may have a capacity or an IQ or a function that has analytical function. So they may be suited to more of an analytical function in terms of their capacity, but not necessarily be athletic. So we're looking at those sort of forms and functions in terms of how they're going to attain, or what their learning styles are, and against measure that against theorists. The environment, we'll look at that, an example in a moment in the next slide of how that will happen. So the characteristics, how they're going to interact with an environment, and how the character is going to be supported through psychology. So we have here an example of an environment where an apprentice might go and be supported in this. We referenced against Piaget and Vygotsky. You can see that this is going to be referenced against the relationship triangle, and we can see that the environment is going to play a very key part. Now, I mentioned our Tachi train. This is the HS2 model that's being developed for HS2, and we're going to need future engineers to be able to support the space, and apprentices are going to need to be trained in the environments we see below. And of course, we'd like to see if individuals can be profiled against the relationship triangle, as previously mentioned. If we just have a look at that going backwards. So they're in that relationship profile. There'll be the employer expectations, there'll be the individual's expectations, there'll be the leaver's expectations. And we address the advocacy in phase 1 in terms of what that looks like. And so we match that with the relationship against the skills, capacity, and parity, and aptitude, equality, and against these are measured in this pathway. You can see through phase 1 and the relationship triangle. So that forms a circular motion through that process. Once that process is complete, we now have developed a profile and a developmental pathway that the employer would recognize through the DNR teams to onboard that person, and they'll then already have a ready-made plan for a learning pathway for that neurodiverse person. It's not something that they now have to think about going forward. So a model that we have to measure against, employers can measure against for neurodiverse individuals, it's one in Switzerland. This is referenced, the Capacity Act, the Health and Safety at Work Act, and also the Equalities Act, and also CARE Act 2014. Also taking into account the Autism Act 2009. You see that to move and utilize the neurodiverse skills in the 21st century is really important for businesses today. It makes business sense to have people and a variety of people in the company proven in these difficult times to having proven resilient and agile with neurodiverse employees. And we can see that at this current moment in time, it's a good time to bridge any misconceptions about any neurodiverse individuals and fit in with the current law. So if we look at various highlights, we can see that reference the system that was the VET system that's called referenced by Hoffman and Schwartz 2015. This program also highlights the employability skills of the youth and gives them a role in society and supports them social and emotional competencies in preparing them for the world of work. And that's an important part of advocacy, and their unique approach is to support them in educating secondary students, which magnifies the importance of apprenticeships. And so that starts in the school, and that's really important, something we don't really emphasize too much in schools here because of the resources and the pressures within school systems in the UK. Whereas they are preparing there in Switzerland neurodiverse learners to reflect best practices and competencies both in a socio-cultural way. So if we look back at our relationship triangle and we reflect on that, you can see that having a career advisor is really important, and that supports neurodiverse learner skills and qualities. You can see that some of the factors from the literature from the Harvard Business Review, LinkedIn, World Economic Forum, Forbes, United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, all skills that are based around these sort of agile skills base are really important, and they also support the management of information, although being and a thought of managing information as being a future skill, and also being agile in the workplace is the future skill. So what are some of the 21st century skills that we're trying to prepare between school and the world of work? Complex problem solving, creativity, cognitive flexibility, meaning the capacity to focus on various concepts simultaneously or to switch between two different concepts efficiently. Interpersonal, interactive communication, collaboration, understanding and adapting, leveraging new technologies effectively, constantly moving into a technocracy in the future. And technology is going to be an integral part of our lives. It already is. And so those transitioning out of school into the world of work need to meet their employers' expectations. They need to realize their own expectations and then transition between that effectively into the world of work. Important 21st century qualities. You can see that judgment and decision making. We need to have some sort of sensitivity around how we interact in the workplace. Use emotional intelligence, self-regulation, develop relationship skills, and we look at that through do a profiler. We look at that through PAGS, We also support that through the Gestalt and the learning pathways, and also the transactional psychology. And last but not least is the aspect of resilience. And neurodiverse people have shown that they are resilient and have been resilient, particularly in this time where we've had COVID-19. So how are we going to achieve our goals? It's going to be a qualitative study and underpinned by quantitative means. And I've chosen the outcome STAR as it's a proven methodology, and the pathway STAR because it particularly is useful in supporting people who have had disadvantages. And both are very useful. They are both robustly tested. Also get an accurate sense of transition and change into all the work. Also has good outcomes of supporting the world into work holistically in a person-centered way. It also helps will structure our key work give us a consistent framework to support more targeted, effective action planning going forward in that space, both in phase 1 and phase 2. So this will be used in phase 1, measured, and then used again in phase 2 and measured, and that is the actual phase 2's onboarding processes. So initial phase 1 will be used along with Do It Profiler and PAGS Profile, and will be used approximately 10 service users between September 20 to September 21. So just to wrap up, you can see that if someone has a disability, doesn't mean to say that they can't be good at their job. You can see that from September to 19% of working age 16 to 64, 17.9% of the population reported they had a disability. Of that 7.9 million people working age disabilities, 53 were currently in work compared to 81.4% of those with disabilities in work. And we can see that source is the ONS report into disability and employment in the UK 2019. In summary, we can see that disabled people are 28.6% points less likely to be in employment than non-disabled people. While progress has been made over recent years, there's still work to be done to align and close the disability employment gap and to ensure all barriers are removed when it comes to recruiting and retaining top talent. There is also an economic as well as a moral educational reason for promoting workplaces for the neurodiverse. Basically, society will save millions. People will be empowered to contribute directly to society through their work, paying taxes, and being role models for others. Thank you for your time today. And if you have any further questions, please do give me an email, dyspraxialambeth@gmail.com.